The theme for January 2021 is Timeless Wisdom, Evolutionary Vision. The topic for today is Looking Ahead. Richard Strozzi Heckler in The Art of Somatic Coaching wrote about the connection between the body and spirituality. Being out of touch with our body limits our capacity to learn and evolve, and it dramatically reduces the possibility of being an authentic spiritual presence. Resmaa Menakem reflects on this awareness. We don't need to understand white supremacy because white supremacy isn't rational. We won't end it with intellect alone. It is internalized deep within our bodies. And Ernest Holmes in Living the SOM made it very clear. In the science of mind, we do not say everything is all right when it is all wrong. He also said this about what it means to be great. There is no place in this practice for arrogance or holier than thou attitude. The great has always been humble. The great has always been kind. The great has always been lovers of humanity. Claim the truth of these words with me. I am the ever evolving, living embodiment of love. Thank you. And now I'm going to pass you over to Reverend Kathleen.
Thank you, Kristen. You know, I thought I'd share one of I just got a book by Swami Beyondananda. And he has a column where supposedly people write in and ask him questions, kind of like a Dear Abby. So it says, Dear Swami, how do you feel about wild game preserves? Signed, Mose Likely. He says, Dear Mo, I've never tried them, but it sounds pretty disgusting. I would stick with the usual strawberry and apricot. So this just so much reminds me of the disconnect sometimes we have with our own spiritual teachings, where we're so used to a certain way of showing up in life, when in truth we have this beautiful timeless wisdom that supports us. And here's an example of it. And it's all about oneness consciousness, but here's an example of it. The physical universe is the manifest body of the one ultimate infinite reality, which some call God, some call source energy. It doesn't matter. The point is this unified field gives birth, this intelligence gives birth to this physical universe, the body of God. And that it is inherently good because love is the impulse behind it. And so the evolutionary process, in other words, this universe is ever evolving. And we know that because we're seeing the complexity of life and of our own relationships becomes fuller over time. Despite the appearances of some of the things that we see, we know that there is a movement in consciousness that is this urge that resides in all of us that impels us, compels us to continue to evolve in all of these attributes of the divine: love, peace, joy, wisdom, intelligence, in abundant supply, all of that good. So we too are these bodies, let's say, these bodies are an expression of God, our individualized expression of that one source. So what are we sticking to? Are we sticking to some misconceptions that we might have, like the Swami shared with us? Are we willing to really take a deep dive into what it means to live as the presence of oneness? Also, we not only have the timeless wisdom, we have this evolutionary vision, which I hinted at. And here's an example. This comes from Centers for Spiritual Living, the greater organization that we belong to. We see a world in which every person lives in alignment with his or her highest spiritual principle. in unity with God and in connection with each other, a world in which individually and collectively we are called to a higher state of consciousness and action. Ernest Holmes, our founder, puts it this way when he talks about this evolutionary process. The spiral of life is upward, and evolution carries us forward. It's not about going backwards, it's about moving forwards. So our spiritual movement, New Thought, Science of Mind, Ancient Wisdom. Our spiritual movement began quite some time ago, actually in the mid-1800s. Many of you know that already who've been with us for a while. In the 1800s with the work of Phineas Parkhurst Quimby. And in those days, his focus was on changing your thinking, change your life. He was able to diagnose physical illnesses, the root cause in consciousness, and use a form of affirmative prayer that we still use today called spiritual mind treatment to transform that thought form that was in consciousness that was creating the disease. He had great success. Thousands of people came to him. His work is well documented. So that was the very birth of our movement. It was physical healing through the power of the mind. Over time, we evolved as a movement. We included that. I mean, each step is inclusive of the previous. We included that, but then next came the evolution of the heart, the bringing the heart into it. And not that the heart was not brought in before, but more consciously. Compassion, love, and with our new sciences, we're understanding the heart is, I forget what it is, 50 times more powerful than the brain. It might be more than that. It might be 500 or 5,000. But we've found that the power of the heart, the power of compassion to heal, Swami Beyondananda calls it, that he says, love is the universal solvent that dissolves everything in its presence. So we began to understand how important not only using universal law is, but how important it is to be that presence of love. And then there was the movement from individual empowerment to collective, the empowerment of all, or the healing of the collective consciousness of humanity. This is, again, the progression of our movement. We're realizing how interconnected we are on a deeper level and how important it is for us all to evolve together. And more recently, and this has been around for a while, but more recently there has been more of a focus in our movement on the body, somatic body-mind healing, somatic methods. And so today that's what our focus is. This is the leading edge of our movement. It's including all of these spiritual tools for the collective healing of humanity. So the wisdom of the body, this has been well documented for quite a long time. And we know people who are involved in yoga and Tai Chi and a lot of these movement type body-centered forms of meditation have realized this. And I think this wisdom of the body or the idea of spirit as body is so beautifully explained in Can We Talk with God by Ernest Holmes. He says, consider spirit as a warm, pulsating, reciprocal thing. It presses against us, it flows through us, it is our intelligence, it is a great universal urge and surge. It is a warm, colorful thing. It is a beautiful thing. Know that there is something more than law, an intelligence to which we may come for inspiration, for guidance, and for direction. A power responding to us, a presence pressing against us, an animating flow through us, a light within us. Embodied spirituality. That's the new focus, embodied spirituality. So somatic coaching has become kind of a new thing, and Richard Strozzi Heckler went on to say, when we connect with the core energy of the body, we contact a vast reservoir of wisdom, compassion, and intelligence. He says over 3 billion years of it, since we inherit the wisdom of those who come before. It's in our DNA, it's in our collective consciousness. So he said, 3 billion years of embodied knowledge of survival, adapting, social intelligence, and intuition. If we listen to this life energy and act from it, there's much it can teach us about living our spiritual values while having our feet firmly on the ground. Embodied spirituality. And so this whole realm of somatic body-mind intelligence is reaffirming for us what we already know to be true, this idea of oneness, our interconnectedness with all life, the interdependence of all life, and a universal intelligence, a unified field of intelligence that we are part of, that we are swimming in, that we are immersed in. And I was thinking, when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about the field of kinesiology, muscle testing. Many of you are aware of that, and how the work of Dr. David Hawkins discovered that we can tap into the universal mind for information through muscle testing, not only into our field around our body, but into the greater universal mind. And that is a somatic type of practice, muscle testing or kinesiology. And here's the thing, we've talked a lot about spiritual bypass and shadow work. One of the challenges in our teaching, particularly for people who are new, is to do what's called spiritual bypass. And Ernest Holmes even warned about that when he said, in Science of Mind, we do not say everything is all right when it's all wrong. He warns us about doing spiritual bypass and saying, oh, everything's fine, life is good. That's true on an essential level. But when we do that, we have the risk of not doing the deep inner work with our emotions, our wounding, that is necessary in order to move forward in consciousness. So spiritual bypassing actually bypasses body wisdom. That essentially is what's going on. So what is it? Let's be a little bit clear about it. It's a tendency to use our spiritual practices and spiritual ideas and phrases to avoid the deep inner work of unresolved emotions, of psychological wounds, and unfinished developmental tasks. So for instance, we might say to ourselves and say to another person, we are 100% responsible for our experiences. Or we might say, everything happens for a reason. Well, we know that these phrases were formed as an evolutionary step for us, because many of us came into this teaching stuck in victim consciousness. So these phrases, I know, were formed for a good purpose, to help us move out of victim consciousness and into a place of empowerment. But here's the issue with that, if we're not completely aware, is that if we just stick with that and don't do the deep inner work, if we just say those phrases and not take a look at the belief structure that's still running our lives, then we will continue those patterns. They will be unhealed. I was listening to some of the videos of a man by the name of Thomas Hubel. Many of you may know him. He's a contemporary. And he spent 4 years in a meditation retreat. 4 years. 4 years. And I was thinking about my friend Charlie Curtis, who spent like 2 years in retreat, in meditating hours and hours every day. And what he said is the same thing Charlie said, that we can reach amazingly exalted states of consciousness and still not do the deep inner work that needs to be done. That's how spiritual practice can be used. And we think we're making great progress. I mean, we've had these beautiful enlightened states, and yet come back into our daily lives and watch the patterns continue to unfold that aren't serving us. So this is where body wisdom comes in. So it doesn't mean we don't do our spiritual practice, or we don't do our spiritual mind treatment, our visioning, the tools that we've learned. We want to hold on to those for sure, because that's part of the puzzle. But we also want to do the deep inner work with the emotions, with the body, because trauma is stored in the tissues of the body. And so the way out, and it's stored, and it causes constriction. We can think of it as the fight or flight response, the stress response. And for some of us, it means a constant state of anxiety, which is a constant state of the stress response dysfunctioning and keeping us in that state. So we do have a way out of this. And that's why I wanted to really focus on this today and get us engaged. And so what can we do about this? The other piece that I think is really important in this whole thing about spiritual bypass, before we move on, is that while there is a positive aspect to those phrases, everything happens for a reason, we're 100% responsible for our reality, there is another aspect to this. We live in a world with other beings who have their own things going on, and we live in this big soup. We're actually born into this soup of human collective consciousness that has trauma in it. So we're immersed in this. And yet we're individualized expressions of God. Ernest Holmes spoke to this. He called it race consciousness, collective conscious race consciousness, and gave us methods of extracting ourselves from the effects of race consciousness to the greatest extent possible. So we can do it through spiritual mind treatment and affirmation. And it's important, therefore, to realize that this is where compassion comes in. To realize that because we're in this collective consciousness, we may have attracted a challenge to grow, but that's not always the way it is. It could be that we are simply the victim of terrible circumstances. And I think about the natural disasters that take place, that people are involved in. And I think about suffering that comes from the wrongdoing of others. And I know there are many who say, well, we called it in and so on. I'm not totally convinced of that. After doing some greater research and actually living my own life, I'm realizing that where we have our power, where our power comes in, is realizing, what can I do from this moment forward? How can I use the spiritual tools that I have available to me to heal those subconscious beliefs that attract things that I don't want in my life? And how can I therefore move forward with a vision to fulfill my dreams, our collective dreams, my individual dreams, which are really part of the collective? So it's a proactive stance of spirituality. We're not going to guilt ourselves about what happened in the past. We have subconscious beliefs that run things. We're in this world with other people, but we can be proactive. We can use these tools together as a collective to further the consciousness of humanity. And that's where our spiritual tools really serve us in the most glorious and amazing ways. So the focus then is healing the collective trauma. And you could say, well, how about the individual trauma? Well, the truth is, we're not really separate. So when we heal our own trauma, it's important to keep in mind that we're healing the trauma of all humanity because of our deep interconnection. So let's go back to this idea of trauma. And I know you were like, oh, I don't want to talk about this. But let's be aware that at this point in time, we're swimming in the collective field of political unrest, the pandemic, white privilege, and systemic racism. And because we're interconnected, it doesn't matter who you are, we are all affected. Research in the human genetics field shows that trauma is passed on in our DNA. And so this means no matter what we look like, if we were born and raised in this world, particularly in America right now, white supremacy and our adaptations to it is an unhealed dissonance and trauma passed down from our ancestors. It's housed in our body temples. And I'm so grateful that we have an active social justice initiative ministry in our community that is actively working on this with us, supporting us in collectively moving forward beyond this trauma. And so you are serving yourself well when you come to the meetings, the Lunch and Learn meetings, like the one that we have today, because then you can be an active part of transforming this collective trauma that's carried in humanity. If we truly want to improve our chances to fulfill our callings, to fulfill our dreams, then we must change at the very core and depth of our being. It's not something we can spiritually bypass or just pretend like it doesn't exist if we truly want to fulfill all that we choose to fulfill. And I'm taking this very seriously myself. This is not just a message for you, it's something that I consider very important for myself as well. So we have so many tools available to us. We have, obviously spiritual mind treatment. We have visioning. We have meditation. And there's also the practices of emotional freedom technique, yoga, breath work, Tai Chi, all great methods of somatic transformation. So I'd like to leave you with 2 somatic practices that I found online. They're by a psychologist, Peter Levine, and he says that this is something you can do on the spot, anywhere, to get yourself out of the stress response and into a relaxation response. Sometimes just deepening your breath helps, but sometimes it doesn't. So he said, this is what you do. So do this with me right now. Take your right hand, put it underneath your left arm so that it rests over your heart. That's why it has to be the right, so it's over the heart. And take your other arm and put it on the other side. And then just rest and breathe in that position. And so he encourages you to just stay there in that position until the anxiety and the fight or flight response dissolves and you get back into a relaxed state. Another easy one to remember is this. Put one hand on your forehead, the other hand on your heart. And again, just breathe and relax until the relaxation response takes hold in your body. And he said you can also put your upper hand down on your belly So you have your hand on your heart and your belly, and you can do the same thing. Just breathe and wait until you feel the shift. Two very easy somatic tools that we can use. Remember, these are in addition to our other tools that we've learned. So we have timeless wisdom in our teachings, and we have evolutionary vision, a vision of a world that works for all, being the presence of love, the interconnectedness of life. An embodied spirituality then is a combination of the power of mind, heart, and body. And it is our intention, therefore, in this spiritual movement to be the most beautiful, glorious, vibrant expression that we can possibly be of the divine. And so there you go, my friends. Let this wisdom of the body be a guiding thing for us. Let's not be afraid of our emotions, and let's come together to heal our collective consciousness. And namaste, my friends. And so it is. And I would like to now introduce you to Sharon Bousquet.